Welcome to this video where I will be showing you a few basic techniques on how to apply rendering to your design to make it look as though it has been manufactured out of plastic. As you can see here, I've got the underlay that I've been using in the previous two videos for wood and metal. So the idea is that we're going to put this underneath our sheet so that we can render it on top. Now this is particularly important with plastics because, as you can see in this example here, what you need to do is to identify where your highlight's going to be, where the light hits it. If you look at this piece of plastic, now it might be a bit difficult to see on there, but when I move it around, you've got this face here which is very glossy, and you can see the way the light catches and it's flat and then it's really bright and then it's flat. You get these white streaks. Or you've got this sort of diffused plastic like on the edge here, where everything is just matte. You don't really get many highlights, it's just a very diffused light source, whereas you might get this sort of hard white diffused area here that then goes straight into a flat tone. So first thing you need to understand is whether or not you're making something that is glossy or is in fact going to be matte, and then play around with that as you are experimenting how to render. If you look on this sheet here, you can see two examples of my practice pieces before I started the video. So this is just a rubber grip that can go onto a pencil, and the idea here is that the light is coming down from this angle and the light would catch on this edge here, so the edge would turn white. One of the things that differentiates it from the way we render other objects is that where the light catches the object, it goes bright white, which means you can't just draw in the different shapes. One sec, let's get this out from under there in case it's showing through. You can't just draw in the edges and then make them dark to show it's the edge. What you actually have to do is plan out all of these edges and then think, right, where would the light hit? If I put the light striking there and there, I can get away with having these dark edges for my object and then having these white highlights as I go around. So what I've tried to do here is think about the light coming down this way, it would catch along the top and then it would catch the bottom of the trigger and then these raised sections on the handle. And it's a bit of a cheat, but the idea is that there's an object behind here that's reflecting the light back, so it's catching on these edges. That just really gives it some definition at the back. So let's try to render this cube. I'm not going to try to render anything like these just because they both took me a very long time and I want this video to be as short and quick as possible. So for our underlay here, we're going to do it in orange. Let's try that. So first thing we're going to do is to put on the very edges of our object, so the external edges. Now hopefully you can see this line here, here and here would be the front edges, but instead of drawing them straight on, what I'm going to do is draw a line parallel to them underneath, or on top, to create this sort of sharp edge. Now this is going to get smaller as I go. When I was rendering this, these started off much larger, these white sections. So I'm going to leave them quite large and then fill them in as I go. So the first thing we needed to do was use the underlay, we've done that. Identify where our highlights have gone, we've done that. Now we need to put on a flat base tone. I can get rid of this now that I'm finished using it. So as we've said before, what you want to do is to adjust your grip on your pencil as you're working. One of the other things, particularly for working with plastics when you're rendering them, the type of pencils you use is paramount. What you're really looking for here is a pencil that's got more clay than graphite. The more clay you've got, the softer this pencil will be. So realistically what you want is a whole range of pencils varying from really hard to really soft, so you can adjust as you go. I'm particularly lucky that these pencils have got a high clay content, so they give me a really nice smooth surface whilst also having the sufficient graphite content that they go really sharp. They don't just crumble when I sharpen them. So holding it further down the length of the pencil, I want to get more of this flat edge touching the surface as I work. I want to put on the lightest tone I want across all of my object not including the stark white highlight. So we're just going to gently work that in. Don't worry if you go over the edge, because you're doing it so lightly that you actually won't notice later on. And remember, when we're doing this, we want to try and follow the longest edge of that surface, so that our eye, if it sees any streaks, thinks they're completely normal because they're following that length. Now you can see I've still got these slightly hard edges here on these white marks. Don't worry, they will go away, because this will all get a bit darker as we work. Now we know from previous videos or from previous experience that light is tending to come in from this direction, although here you would argue that it's coming sort of head on. Just decide where your light's coming from. If it's coming from head on, then the darkest section is going to be there, there and there. If it's coming more from this direction, which means we're going to cut out most of this highlight later, this whole face will be the darkest section. We're going to have it coming down sort of this way, so that area there is going to be really light, making this area down here the darkest one. So we're just going to make that darker again. I'm going to try and do this as quick as we can. Just to give you a bit of warning, I find rendering plastics the hardest thing. So if you start off doing this and you think, oh, I just can't do it, it's an absolute pain, well, that's how everybody feels when they try and render plastic, because it just requires you to be so careful with avoiding streaks and lines and so on. So now we've got this flat tone. What we're going to do is just keep working it until we can get it consistent. Now where I'm changing my angle and going to follow the shortest edge, I'm doing it really gently. You will still see some interference, you'll see a change in texture. Don't worry, you can adjust that as you go along, and you can always do an entire pass along that length, going vertically, and then come back across it following that 30-degree isometric line or parallel to the edge, so that the last pass is actually following the direction you want the eye to travel. Hopefully that's evident from what we've just done. So you can see now we've got these different tones building up. We're going to do the same down here, but we're going to get lighter as we get slightly towards the top, but still trying to keep each face a consistent, almost monotone colour. You almost want it to be one particular shade of your chosen colour. I mean, it's almost impossible to do with pencils, but that's what we're aiming for. So here you can see we're starting to build that up. Now on the top we can start to play around with this back edge. As I said, these lines are starting to get thinner and thinner. And eventually what we'll do is we'll make quite a dark line. As you can see here, there's some quite dark lines next to the lightest edge, and that's intentional to create contrast, because that's what we really need here. We need that contrast. We make it thinner as it comes down, so we show where the light hits. So sometimes we'll make it slightly darker there and diffuse that into the centre. And this is by no means a perfect example of how to render. Hopefully these two are far more informative for you. This is more about how you control your tool. And remember, we are just doing a drawing or a sketch that's intended to communicate the materials and textures. We are not producing a photorealistic image. Apologies for that, that's an alarm telling me I've only got 10 minutes left to do the video. And if you can hear voices in the background, that's my wife and son playing downstairs. So again, apologies if that's distracting you. Alright, and then we'll make this a lot flatter, this face. There we go. And this entire edge is now going to get really thin. This entire face is going to get darker. So you can see when we put that first orange layer on, and I said that was going to be the lightest tone on our surfaces, we've gone way darker than that. So if you wanted it to be the darkest tone, the first one we put on, if you wanted that to be the actual colour of your object, then you would have had to have kept everything super light. It's one of the reasons why doing really light plastics is incredibly difficult. But here we go, we've got hopefully a fairly consistent tone across most of the faces. You can see around here and here it's very difficult. Now where we've got an overlap, what we can do is just take a rubber and just go back over that edge. Because the rubber will take off most of the pencil, our eye will still pick that up and say, oh, that looks like it's white, or as bright as, far brighter than the edge that's next to it, or the colour that's next to it. So therefore we can get away with, let's get that in, that. Now we've got all that orange in, one of the other things we can do is use other colours. So I find that with oranges, so up here and in there, using this brown, this is a burnt ochre brown, I can actually really gently overlay that onto the orange, and instead of looking brown, it simply darkens out that orange, gives it a tone. So for reds you can use a blue, for blues you can always use a sort of very bluish mauve, that sort of thing. Depends really what type of shade you want. I tend to find with blues, just start with a really pale blue and then use a darker blue that's moving more towards the mauve or violet part of the spectrum. But as you can see, we're starting to get this darker tone here. It just helps us put these dark shadows on without having to keep going brighter and brighter orange. It actually allows us to go darker, sort of neutralising some of the tone. And then of course if we want to, we can go around the outside with a nice sharpened pencil. Let's just, and give a really dark outline, darker in the shadows, and then making it lighter as we come towards front. And if you wanted to, I suppose, you could be really cheeky and just take that brown and run that into your shadows around the edges and really pick out your edges. But that gives you a rough idea of how to do plastics. Go away, practice. This is going to be the hardest one for most people. It's going to take the most time to get right, and your equipment really is key to getting the result you want. Plastics are far easier when you use spirit-based markers and so on, but that's a whole nother set of skills. So, just to clarify, use of an underlay, identify your highlights, use flat base tones, build in your tones and shades as evenly as you can, use other colours for your shadows, and then try and use hard lines next to your highlights to give you the greatest contrast whilst then blending them in. Hope that's been useful.